This is an ABC News special report. Attack on the Capitol, the investigation. Now reporting David Muir.
Good afternoon. We're coming on the air because the January 6th committee is about to present new evidence to the American people about the unprecedented effort to overturn the results of the 2020 election and then the attack on the U.S. Capitol, of course. Committee members about to take their seats there on Capitol Hill. They're expected to reveal details of former President Trump and his allies, their direct involvement to pressure officials in several states, including Georgia and Arizona, to ignore the will of the voters. And the committee says to put forward false slates of electors with the sole purpose of keeping former President Trump in power. You can see the panel there ready to go. The committee says it will prove Donald Trump knew his repeated claims of fraud and a stolen election were false, but that he pushed forward with them anyway. That he drove a pressure campaign based on lies and was warned his actions risked inciting violence, but did it anyway. Our team of correspondents standing by across Washington, Jonathan Karl, Rachel Scott, Pierre Thomas among them. The committee calling several witnesses today, including Georgia's Republican Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger and his deputy Gabriel Sterling. Following the election, you'll remember that phone call during which the former president could be heard urging them to find him 11,780 votes, enough to overturn Joe Biden's victory in that particular state. Of course, that conversation was recorded and then made public for the American people. Also testifying today will be Republican Arizona House Speaker Rusty Bowers, who pushed back against pressure in his state to overturn his state's election from Joe Biden to Donald Trump. Let's listen to the chair, who I believe just gavelled in moments ago, Bennie Thompson. We'll also hear from a Georgia election worker. She counted the ballots election night. She counted ballots in 2016 when Donald Trump won. Let's listen.
The Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol will be in order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the committee in recess at any point. Pursuant to House Deposition Authority Regulation 10, the chair announces the committee's approval to release the deposition material presented during today's hearing. Good afternoon. At our last hearing, we told the story of a scheme driven by Donald Trump to pressure former Vice President Mike Pence to illegally overturn the election results. We showed that when the pressure campaign failed and Mike Pence fulfilled his constitutional obligation, Donald Trump turned a violent mob loose on him. We showed that the mob came within roughly 40 feet of the Vice President. Today, we'll show that what happened to Mike Pence wasn't an isolated part of Donald Trump's scheme to overturn the election. In fact, pressuring public servants into betraying their oaths was a fundamental part of the playbook. And a handful of election officials in several key states stood between Donald Trump and the upending of American democracy. As we begin today, it's important to remember when we count the votes for president, we count the votes state by state. For the most part, the candidates who win the popular vote in a state wins all the state's electoral college votes. And whoever wins a majority of the electoral college votes wins the presidency. So when Donald Trump tried to overturn the election results, he focused on just a few states. He wanted officials at the local and state level to say the vote was tainted by widespread fraud and throw out the results, even though, as we showed last week, there wasn't any voter fraud that could have overturned the election results. And like Mike Pence, these public servants wouldn't go along with Donald Trump's scheme. And when they wouldn't embrace the big lie and substitute the will of the voters with Donald Trump's will to remain in power, Donald Trump worked to ensure they faced the consequences. Threats to people's livelihood and lives, threats of violence that Donald Trump knew about and amplified. And in our other hearings, we can't just look backward at what happened in late 2020 and in the early 2021 because the danger hadn't gone away. Our democracy endured a mighty test on January 6th and in the days before. We say our institutions held. But what does that really mean? Democratic institutions aren't abstractions or ideas. They are local officials who oversee elections, secretaries of state, people in whom we placed our trust that they'll carry out their duties. But what if they don't? 2 weeks ago, New Mexico held its primary elections. One county commission refused to certify the results, citing vague, unsupported claims dealing with Dominion voting machines. The court stepped in, saying New Mexico law required the commission to certify the results. 2 of the 3 members of the commission finally relented. One still refused, saying his vote, quote, isn't based on any evidence, it's not based on any facts, it's only based on my gut feeling and my own intuition, and that's all I need. By the way, a few months ago, this county commissioner was found guilty of illegally entering the Capitol grounds on January 6th. This story reminds us of a few things. First, as we've shown in our previous hearings, claims that widespread voter fraud tainted the 2020 presidential election have always been a lie. Donald Trump knew they were a lie, and he kept amplifying them anyway. Everything we described today, the relentless, destructive pressure campaign on state and local officials, was all based on a lie. Donald Trump knew it, he did it anyway. Second, the lie hasn't gone away. It's corrupting our democratic institutions. People who believe that lie are now seeking positions of public trust. And as seen in New Mexico, their oath to be to the people they serve will take a back seat to their commitment to the big lie. If that happens, who will make sure our institutions don't break under the pressure? We won't have close calls, we'll have a catastrophe. My distinguished colleague from California, Mr. Schiff, will present much of the Select Committee's finding on this matter. First, I'm pleased to recognize our Vice Chair, Ms. Cheney of Wyoming, for any opening statement she'd care to offer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Today, we will begin examining President Trump's effort to overturn the election by exerting pressure on state officials and state legislatures. Donald Trump had a direct and personal role in this effort, as did Rudy Giuliani, as did John Eastman. In other words, the same people who were attempting to pressure Vice President Mike Pence to reject electoral votes illegally were also simultaneously working to reverse the outcome of the 2020 election at the state level. Each of these efforts to overturn the election is independently serious. Each deserves attention both by Congress and by our Department of Justice. But as a federal court has already indicated, these efforts were also part of a broader plan. And all of this was done in preparation for January 6th. I would note 2 points for particular focus today. First, today you will hear about calls made by President Trump to officials of Georgia and other states. As you listen to these tapes, keep in mind what Donald Trump already knew at the time he was making those calls. He had been told over and over again that his stolen election allegations were nonsense. For example, this is what former Attorney General Bill Barr said to President Trump about allegations in Georgia.
We took a hard look at this ourselves, and based on our review of it, including the interviews of the key witnesses, the Fulton County allegations had no merit. The ballots under the table were legitimate ballots. They weren't in a suitcase. They had been pre-opened for eventually feeding into the machine. All the stuff about the water leak and that there was some subterfuge involved. We felt there was some confusion, but there was no evidence of a subterfuge to create an opportunity to feed things into the count. And so we didn't see any evidence of fraud in the Fulton County episode.
And Acting Deputy Attorney General Richard Donahue told Donald Trump this.
And I said something to the effect of, sir, we've done dozens of investigations, hundreds of interviews. The major allegations are not supported by the evidence developed.
Mr. Trump was told by his own advisors that he had no basis for his stolen election claims, yet he continued to pressure state officials to change the election results. Second, you will hear about a number of threats and efforts to pressure state officials to reverse the election outcome. One of our witnesses today, Gabriel Sterling, explicitly warned President Trump about potential violence on December 1st, 2020, more than a month before January 6th. You will see excerpts from that video repeatedly today.
It has all gone too far. All of it. Joe DeGenova today asked for Chris Krebs, a patriot who ran CISA, to be shot. A 20-something tech in Gwinnett County today has death threats and a noose put out saying he should be hung for treason because he was transferring a report on batches from an EMS to a county computer so he could read it. It has to stop. Mr. President, you have not condemned these actions or this language. Senators, you have not condemned this language or these actions. This has to stop. We need you to step up, and if you're going to take a position of leadership, show some. My boss, Secretary Raffensperger, his address is out there. They have people doing caravans in front of their house. They've had people come onto their property. It has to stop. This is elections. This is the backbone of democracy, and all of you who have not said a damn word are complicit in this.
The point is this: Donald Trump did not care about the threats of violence. He did not condemn them. He made no effort to stop them. He went forward with his fake allegations anyway. One more point. I would urge all of those watching today to focus on the evidence the committee will present. Don't be distracted by politics. This is serious. We cannot let America become a nation of conspiracy theories and thug violence. Finally, I want to thank our witnesses today for all of your service to our country. Today, all of America will hear about the selfless actions of these men and women who acted honorably to uphold the law, protect our freedom, and preserve our Constitution. Today, Mr. Chairman, we will all see an example of what truly makes America great. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Without objection, the chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Madam Vice Chair. On November 3rd, 2020, Donald Trump ran for re-election to the office of the presidency, and he lost. His opponent, Joe Biden, finished ahead in the key battleground states of Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and elsewhere. Nevertheless, and for the first time in history, the losing presidential candidate fought to hold on to power. As we have seen in previous hearings, he did so through a variety of means. On Election Day, he sought to stop the counting of the vote, knowing that the millions of absentee ballots elections officials would be counting on Election Day and thereafter would run strongly against him and deliver a victory to Joe Biden. Next, and when he could not stop the counting, he tried to stop state legislatures and governors from certifying the results of the election. He went to court and filed dozens of frivolous lawsuits, making unsubstantiated claims of fraud. When that too failed, he mounted a pressure campaign directed at individual state legislators to try to get them to go back into session and either declare him the winner, decertify Joe Biden as the winner, or send two slates of electors to Congress, one for Biden and one for him, and pressure Vice President Pence to choose him as the winner. But the state legislatures wouldn't go along with this scheme, and neither would the vice president. None of the legislatures agreed to go back into special session and declare him the winner. No legitimate state authority in the states Donald Trump lost would agree to appoint fake Trump electors and send them to Congress. But this didn't stop the Trump campaign either. They assembled groups of individuals in key battleground states and got them to call themselves electors, created phony certificates associated with these fake electors, and then transmitted these certificates to Washington and to the Congress to be counted during the joint session of Congress on January 6th. None of this worked. But according to Federal District Judge David Carter, former President Trump and others likely violated multiple federal laws by engaging in this scheme, including conspiracy to defraud the United States. You will hear evidence of the former president and his top advisors' direct involvement in key elements of this plot, or what Judge Carter called a coup in search of a legal theory. For as the judge explained, President Trump's pressure campaign to stop the electoral count did not end with Vice President Pence. It targeted every tier of federal and state elected officials. Convincing state legislatures, he said, to certify competing electors was essential to stop the count and ensure President Trump's reelection. As we have seen in our prior hearings, running through this scheme was a big lie that the election was plagued with massive fraud and somehow stolen. You'll remember what the president's own Attorney General, Bill Barr, said he told the president about these claims of massive fraud affecting the outcome of the election.
And I told him that the stuff that his people were shoveling out to the public was bullshit. I mean, that the claims of fraud were bullshit.
The president's lie was and is a dangerous cancer on the body politic. If you can convince Americans that they cannot trust their own elections, that any time they lose it is somehow illegitimate, then what is left but violence to determine who should govern? This brings us to the focus of today's hearing. When state elections officials refused to stop the count, Donald Trump and his campaign tried to put pressure on them. When state executive officials refused to certify him the winner of states he lost, he applied more pressure. When state legislators refused to go back into session and appoint Trump electors, he amped up the pressure yet again. Anyone who got in the way of Donald Trump's continued hold on power after he lost the election was the subject of a dangerous and escalating campaign of pressure. This pressure campaign brought angry phone calls and texts, armed protests, intimidation, and all too often, threats of violence and death. State legislators were singled out. So too were statewide elections officials. Even local elections workers, diligently doing their jobs, were accused of being criminals and had their lives turned upside down. As we will show, the president's supporters heard the former president's claims of fraud and the false allegations he made against state and local officials as a call to action.
Stop the steal! Stop the steal! Stop the steal! You're a threat to democracy! You're a threat to free and honest election! America! We love our rights and our freedom!
Tyranny will not be allowed in our country. You're a tyrant, you're a felon, and you must turn yourself in to the authorities immediately.
And then about 45 minutes later, we started to hear the noises outside my home, and my stomach sunk, and I thought, it's me. And then it's just, we don't know what's going to, I mean, the uncertainty of that was what was the fear. Like, are they coming with guns? Are they going to attack my house? I'm in here with my kid, I'm trying to put him to bed. And so it was, that was the scariest moment, just not knowing what was going to happen.
This pressure campaign against state and local officials spanned numerous contested states, as you will see in this video produced by the Select Committee.
My name is Josh Roselman. I'm an investigative counsel for the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol. Beginning in late November 2020, the president and his lawyers started appearing before state legislators, urging them to give their electoral votes to Trump, even though he lost the popular vote.
I represent President Trump along with Jenna Ellis, and this is our fourth or fifth hearing.
This election has to be turned around because we won Pennsylvania by a lot, and we won all of these swing states by a lot.
This was a strategy with both practical and legal elements. The Select Committee has obtained an email from just 2 days after the election in which a Trump campaign lawyer named Cleta Mitchell asked another Trump lawyer, John Eastman, to write a memo justifying the idea.
When do you remember this coming up as an option in the post-election period for the first time?
Right after the election. It might have been before the election.
Eastman prepared a memo attempting to justify this strategy, which was circulated to the Trump White House, Rudy Giuliani's legal team, and state legislators around the country. And he appeared before the Georgia state legislature to advocate for it publicly.
You could also do what the Florida legislature was prepared to do, which is to adopt a slate of electors yourselves. And when you add in the mix of the significant statistical anomalies and sworn affidavits and video evidence of outright election fraud, I don't think it's just your authority to do that, but quite frankly, I think you have a duty to do that, to protect the integrity of the election here in Georgia.
But Republican officials in several states released public statements recognizing that President Trump's proposal was unlawful. For instance, Georgia Governor Brian Kemp called the proposal unconstitutional, while Arizona House Speaker Rusty Bowers wrote that the idea would undermine the rule of law. The pressure campaign to get state legislators to go along with the scheme intensified when President Trump invited delegations from Michigan and Pennsylvania to the White House.
Either you or Speaker Chatfield, did you make the point to the president that you were not going to do anything that violated Michigan law?
I believe we did. Whether or not it was those exact words or not, but I think that the words that I would have more likely used is we were going to follow the law.
Nevertheless, the pressure continued. The next day, President Trump tweeted, quote, "Hopefully the courts and/or legislatures will have the courage to do what has to be done to maintain the integrity of our elections and the United States of America itself. The world is watching." He posted multiple messages on Facebook listing the contact information for state officials and urging his supporters to contact them to, quote, "demand a vote on decertification." In one of those posts, President Trump disclosed Mike Shirkey's personal phone number to his millions of followers.
All I remember is receiving over just shy of 4,000 text messages over a short period of time, calling to take action. It was a loud noise, loud, consistent cadence of, we heard that the Trump folks are calling and asking for changes in the electors, and you guys can do this. Well, they were believing things that were untrue.
These efforts also involved targeted outreach to state legislators.
Hi, Representative. My name is Angela McCallum. I'm calling from Trump campaign headquarters in Washington, D.C. You do have the power to reclaim your authority and send a slate of electors that will support President Trump and Vice President Pence.
From President Trump's lawyers and from Trump himself.
And I've become friendly with legislators that I didn't know 4 weeks ago.
Another legislator, Pennsylvania House Speaker Brian Cutler, received daily voicemails from Trump's lawyers in the last week of November.
Mr. Speaker, this is Rudy Giuliani and Jenna Ellis. We're calling you together because we'd like to discuss, obviously, the election.
Hello, Mr. Speaker. This is Jenna Ellis, and I'm here with Mayor Giuliani.
Hey, Brian, it's Rudy. I really have something important to call to your attention that I think really changes things.
Cutler felt that the outreach was inappropriate and asked his lawyers to tell Rudy Giuliani to stop calling, but Giuliani continued to reach out.
I understand that you don't want to talk to me now. I just want to bring some facts to your attention and talk to you as a fellow Republican.
On December 30th, Trump ally Steve Bannon announced a protest at Cutler's home.
We're getting on the road and we're going down to Cutler. We're going to start going to offices, and if we have to, we're going to go to homes, and we're going to let them know what we think about them.
There were multiple protests. I actually don't remember the exact number. There was at least 3, I think, outside either my district office or my home. And you're correct, my then 15-year-old son was home by himself for the first one. All of my personal information was doxed online. It was my personal email, my personal cell phone, my home phone number. In fact, we had to disconnect our home phone for about 3 days because it would ring all hours of the night and would fill up with messages.
Brian Cutler, we're outside.
Clerks facing felony charges in Michigan. Poll watchers denied access in Pennsylvania.
These ads were another element in the effort. The Trump campaign spent millions of dollars running ads online and on television.
The evidence is overwhelming. Call your governor and legislators. Demand they inspect the machines and hear the evidence.
Public pressure on state officials often grew dangerous in the lead up to January 6th.
What are we going to do? What can you and I do to a state legislator besides kill him? Although we should not do that. I'm not advising that, but I mean, what else can you do, right?
The punishment for treason is death.
The state pressure campaign and the danger it posed to state officials and the state capitals around the nation was a dangerous precursor to the violence we saw on January 6th at the U.S. Capitol. Today you will hear from Rusty Bowers, the Republican Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives. He will tell us about his conversations with the President, with Rudy Giuliani and John Eastman, and what the President's team asked of him and how his oath of office would not permit it. You will then hear from Brad Raffensperger, the Republican Secretary of State of Georgia, who Trump directed to, quote, find 11,780 votes that did not exist, but just the exact number of votes needed to overtake Joe Biden. You will also hear from Gabriel Sterling, the chief operating officer, his chief operating officer, about the spurious claims of fraud in the elections in Georgia, and who, responding to a cascading set of threats to his elections team, warned the president to stop, that someone was going to get killed. And you will hear from Wandrea Shea Moss, a former local elections worker in Fulton County, Georgia, about how all of the lies about the election impacted the lives of real people who administer our elections and still do. You will hear what they experienced when the most powerful man in the world, the President of the United States, sought to cling to power after being voted out of office by the American people. The system held, but barely. And the system held because people of courage, Republicans and Democrats, like the witnesses you will hear today, put their oath to the country and Constitution above any other consideration. They did their jobs, as we must do ours. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
I now welcome our first panel of witnesses. We're joined today by a distinguished legislator from Arizona, Rusty Bowers, who's a Republican Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives. Mr. Bowers was first elected to the state legislature in 1993 and has served as Speaker since 2019. Welcome, Speaker Bowers. Brad Raffensperger is the 29th Secretary of State of Georgia, serving in this role since 2019. As an elected official and a Republican, Secretary Raffensperger is responsible for supervising elections in Georgia and maintaining the state's public records. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. Gabriel Sterling is the Chief Operating Officer in the Georgia Secretary of State's office. Mr. Sterling was the statewide voting systems implementation manager for the 2020 election in Georgia, responsible for leading the Secretary of State's response to the COVID pandemic and rolling out modernized voting equipment. I will swear in our witnesses. The witnesses will please stand and raise their right hand. Do you swear or affirm on the penalty of perjury that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Please be seated. Let the record reflect that the witnesses answered in the affirmative. Speaker Bowers, thank you for being with us today. You're the Speaker of the Arizona House and a self-described conservative Republican. You campaigned for President Trump and with him during the 2020 election. Is it fair to say that you wanted Donald Trump to win a second term in office? Please.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
And is it your understanding that President Biden was the winner of the popular vote in Arizona in 2020?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Pursuant to Section 5C8 of House Resolution 503, the chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Schiff, for questions.
Speaker Bowers, thank you for being with us today. Before we begin with the questions that I had prepared for you, I wanted to ask you about a statement that former President Trump issued, which I received just prior to the hearing. Have you had a chance to review that statement?
My counsel called from Arizona and read it to me. Yes, sir.
In that statement, I won't read it in its entirety. Former President Trump begins by calling you a rhino, Republican in name only. He then references a conversation in November 2020 in which he claims that you told him that the election was rigged and that he had won Arizona. To quote the former president, during the conversation, he told me the election was rigged and that I won Arizona, unquote. Did you have such a conversation with the president?
I did have a conversation with the president. That certainly isn't it, but there were parts of it that are true, but there are parts that are not, sir.
And the part that I read you, is that false?
Anywhere, anyone, anytime has said that I said the election was rigged, that would not be true.
And when the former president in his statement today claimed that you told him that he won Arizona, is that also false?
That is also false.
Mr. Bowers, I understand that after the election, and I don't know whether this is the conversation the former president is referring to, but after the election, you received a phone call from President Trump and Rudy Giuliani in which they discussed the result of the presidential election in Arizona. If you would, tell us about that call and whether the former president or Mr. Giuliani raised allegations of election fraud.
Thank you. My wife and I had returned from attending our church meetings. It was on a Sunday, and we were still in the driveway, and I had received a call from a colleague telling me that the White House was trying to get in touch with her and I, and that she said, please, if you get a call, let's try to take this together. Immediately, I saw that the White House on my Bluetooth